Okay, in this video we're going to review the midpoint formula. Okay, so the formula for finding the midpoint of any two given points can be found using this. So the x-coordinate for the midpoint is going to be the average of the x-coordinates of the 2 points. Okay, so you want to think about the midpoint as an average. So we're going to average the two x-coordinates. We're going to add those together and divide by 2. So that's going to be the x-coordinate of the midpoint. We're going to do the same thing with the y's. We're going to take the average of the y-coordinates, or we're going to add the two y-coordinates and divide those by 2. Okay? So once you've done that, then you've got the coordinates for the midpoint of any line segment. Okay? So a real quick example here. We've got point A at -2, -1. We've got point B at 2, 2. Okay, so let's use the formula here. We've got, so the midpoint of AB, we're going to add the x-coordinates together. That's -2. Okay, -2 plus 2 divided by 2. And then I want to add the y-coordinates together, -1 plus 2 divided by 2. Do some real quick, easy math, okay? And with the x-coordinates, we get 0 divided by 2. With the y-coordinates, we get 1 divided by 2. And when we simplify that, that gives us the midpoint of segment AB is at the point 0, 1/2. Okay, let's take a quick look at the graph just to verify that. All right, so as you can see, I've already plotted the points A and B. So A was at -2, -1. B was at 2, 2. All right, so I can draw the line between those two. And we said we found the midpoint to be right there at 0, 1/2. Okay, so that looks right to me. The midpoint is going to be at 0, 1/2. So quick, easy problem on finding midpoint. So in this second problem, we're going to look at the application of using the midpoint formula in a problem that involves some geometry that you learned before. Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to plot these 4 points. We're going to go look at the graph, and we're going to kind of talk our way through this. And then we'll come back and show what's important here. So we want to show that the quadrilateral with vertices at P, Q, R, and S, okay, we want to show that that quadrilateral is a parallelogram. And we're going to do that, if you'll think back to when you were studying parallelograms, one of the rules for all parallelograms was that the diagonals bisect one another, okay? And we're going to need to prove that that's the case in order to prove that this is a parallelogram, okay? And the way that we can prove that is by showing that these two diagonals share a midpoint. Okay, so let's go look at the graph real quick, and then we'll come back and show our work algebraically. All right, so I've already drawn the parallelogram here, the quadrilateral. We don't know yet that it's a parallelogram. So we've got the quadrilateral PQRS, okay? So in order to prove that this quadrilateral is a parallelogram, we need to be able to prove that the diagonals, okay, the line from S to Q and that the line from P to R share a midpoint, okay? So where those two segments intersect one another should be the same point, okay? We want to use the midpoint formula for P to R and the midpoint formula for S to Q to prove, okay, first off, that from S to that midpoint and Q to that midpoint, that's obviously, once you find the midpoint, that means those green partial segments are congruent to one another. And then we're going to do the same for P to R, okay? So because that's the midpoint, we're going to be able to prove that the segment from P to that midpoint and the segment from R to that midpoint are both congruent as well. So if they share a midpoint, that means we've got a parallelogram here, okay? So let's go show the work and see if that point where they intersect is the midpoint for both. All right, so we're going to start with the midpoint of SQ. Okay, so I've gone ahead and plugged in. So S to Q, we're going to add the x-coordinates 2 and 4, okay, divided by 2. Then we're going to add the y-coordinates 7 and 4 divided by 2. So that gives me 6 over 2 and 11 over 2. So we can simplify the x-coordinate to 3. And then the y-coordinate would be 11 over 2, or 5.5, okay? Now we want to do the same thing for PR, and hopefully we get the same answer. If that's the case, then we definitely have a parallelogram here. So the midpoint of PR is going to be the sum of the x-coordinates 1 and 5 divided by 2, and then the sum of the y-coordinates 2 and 9 divided by 2. So that also gives me 6 halves, 11 halves, which also simplifies to 3 11/2, okay? So because those two diagonals share a midpoint, it means that we definitely have a parallelogram, okay? So that's one application for the midpoint formula. And it's, again, extra practice. We've got a couple different midpoints here that we found, so we got a little bit of extra practice in there.